Good evening. We are back. Thank you so much for tuning in to another live stream presented by Alpha News. I'm your host, Kyle Hooten. Today we are joined by conservative commentators Bella Dangelo and Walter Hudson. Thank you so much for joining us, Bella and Walter. You might recognize Bella. She hosts the Dangelo Show podcast and has been giving conservative commentary for quite a while via that platform. Guys, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Happy to be a part of it.
Absolutely. Bella, we talked about this a little bit before we went live here, but I understand your show has sort of an interesting origin, and you can see this reflected in your website where you're sitting on a pickup truck. Is it true that you started conservative commentary based out of your vehicle?
I sure did. I actually left Minneapolis to go get a job in the oil field, and at the same time, my extreme desire to be part of the greater cause got me to start the podcast. And the only way I could control the audio was inside my pickup truck at the end of my workday.
Wow, that's really incredible. It's a unique perspective that you bring, a very hardworking middle America type perspective. So you said that you started your show from your pickup after you're working in the oil field, I assume in the Dakotas?
Correct.
Awesome. So what issues were you seeing out there, among normal middle Americans that prompted you to want to become part of the movement?
The biggest thing that really frustrated me was when you would try and talk to people, especially young people, everybody said that their vote didn't count. And so I'm a salesperson by nature. And what I wanted to do was I thought, if I'm going to make a difference, right? If you believe that one person can make a difference, I thought, I'm not a media head. I am just a working person. I want to be able to reach out to people that don't normally listen to conservative talk radio, and I want to use humor. So I want to be able to get an 18-year-old or a 6-year-old liberal, and by using a lot of humor and not the screaming and ranting and bantering, that's how I developed the show. And I was more of a nationalist, but always trying to get people to, as I say, wake up, think, listen and learn, and then get engaged and hopefully vote.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense that, if one person can have an impact, that you can magnify that impact by talking to more people, developing an audience, getting a broader reach.
Absolutely. Well, I had a lot of fun. And what really made my day is when you can talk to, like, say, I'm going to give this example real quick. There was an 18-year-old roughneck that said that the government had no impact in his life. And I said, that's great. I said, at the end of the week, when you get your paycheck, for the sake of simplicity, put $40 in your pocket and walk to your neighbor and give the 60 to your neighbor. When you open the door, they're all sitting in there. They're not working. They're watching TV. They're eating pizza, drinking beer. Who knows what else they're spending your money on? And he looked at, and then I said, and then you're going to tell them, you got to go back to work so you can do the exact same thing next week. And he looked at me and he said, what country are you talking about? And I said, God bless America. That's entitlement. Mm-hmm. And do me one favor, listen to my show, good, bad, or ugly. I want your feedback because it really matters to me. A week later, he called me, and he was not only addicted to the show, but his buddies would listen to it while driving in. And, when we're able to get young people like that engaged, that's what really makes my day.
Absolutely. Especially, the hard working class, the people that are actually keeping the gears of America turning, they need to be engaged because they're the ones that are getting trampled by the current system.
Absolutely.
So Walter, I'm curious about your story as well. How do you and Bella know each other?
Well, she reached out to me when I had my radio show on Twin Cities News Talk AM 1130, which I ran for about 3 years. And we connected that way and just as colleagues have kind of kept in touch. And then more recently, a couple of months ago at this point, she proposed collaboration, and we've been doing that ever since. And I think it's kind of funny that she says that, and she talks about this quite a bit, how she's looking to present humor and kind of give something that's a little bit different than the typical ranting and raving rhetorical belligerence. Because that's my specialty. I rant and rave and I give rhetorical belligerence. So I've been able to inject some of that back into the show.
Absolutely. I like humor, but I also like ranting and raving, as some people who watch our stream might know. How's the reception been when you guys are looking at your audience? How do you pick your messages in a way that will resonate with people?
I guess so we've been kind of focusing a lot on Minnesota and Minnesota politics. Most recently, if I can do you want me to give kind of guess and topics? Because most recent, Scott Jensen was on. We talked about the fraudulent criminality of COVID, and then we segued into his campaign. And when I talk about Stupid, the stupidity of these far progressive left agendas that, you can have a much easier dialogue than when Obama was in office, because it was pretty stealth in what that administration was doing. And so, we talk each week about whatever is relevant within the week. And quite honestly, it's not hard to find topics to talk about because everything seems to be just completely out of control these days.
Absolutely. From your perspective, when you're interacting with people like that roughneck that you talked about earlier, how are they feeling now under Biden as compared to how they were under Trump?
So I'm back in Minneapolis, and I will give a couple of examples. There was a young girl that worked at Cub Foods that really was not engaged in politics at all. I got her engaged in talking with me. She voted in the November election. Shortly after, I asked her if she was still listening to my show and if she felt engaged. And she said the same thing, which got me started in the beginning. My vote doesn't count, right? The integrity of the vote. Shortly after that, I remember picking up my Christmas tree. Mm-hmm. And the 18-year-old and the 20-year-old, they were helping me with the tree. They saw the Trump bumper stickers on the back of my truck. They said immediately to me after I'm just picking out my tree, and they pointed to the stickers and said, "We voted for Trump. However, the Democrats will do everything and anything," and they did, to steal the election. So when so many people try to say that the young are disengaged and misinformed, I question how much do you really talk to the younger people? Because they are engaged and listening. You need to ask them, but it's what I've been saying a long time. I know that there's a lot of people that did vote for Biden that, whether they're probably not expressing it, they are asking themselves, did we vote for this person who was supposed to be the bring the aisles together, the bringing the peace and the civility to this country? When did he say he was going to ask for $6 trillion in additional spending, rip open the borders, all of these things that are just destroying the economy and sending inflation so quickly, and they are seeing it. And I believe that it is doing this administration and the Democrat Party in, because I also believe it's fully exposing what has happened to the party.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. A question for either or both of you. You guys talk about how these young people, they feel like their vote doesn't matter. They're feeling disenfranchised. What do you think led to that position? Because all through primary education, kids learn the importance of civic duty. They learn how to vote. They learn how important these things are. And then you see them out in the real world when they're 18, 19, 20 years old. And it seems like none of that education is stuck. They think their vote doesn't matter. They feel like an inconsequential, effect on the system. Why the despair?
Well, Bella often talks about the need, and she stresses the need to have a positive message. And this is what you're speaking to, I think, is indicative of a truly positive observation, which is the thing that's fueling the cynicism, which may be unto itself negative, is objective observation. In other words, they can see, they can read, and they can think. And because they can see, read, and think, they're putting it together that the reality of what they're perceiving does not match up with the rhetoric that they were indoctrinated with in school. There's a disconnect there. And I think that, Trump showed us that there's a tremendous opportunity to cut across partisan divides, typical conventional partisan divide, with a message that says, this system doesn't care about you. And so it's time to knock over the table and to braid together some whips and go around, whipping some money chains. It's time to drain the swamp. It's time to do something that's going to fundamentally change the way that government works. I mean, Obama used to talk about fundamentally transforming America. We should be talking about fundamentally transforming government so that it actually functions in the way that we were told it does in school when we were watching that after school special about how a bill comes into law.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, unfortunately, it seems like things are getting fundamentally transformed in the other direction. I mean, you turn on the news and you hear about these massive Wall Street entities buying up houses to sell them back to, investors in foreign countries. You hear about the $6 trillion of spending that you just brought up a minute ago, Bella. I mean, it's really seriously daunting stuff. When you guys are looking at all of this, how do you stay optimistic? Because I know that's a challenge that a lot of our viewers face sometimes.
So 5 years in the oil field, right? And every single day from the company men, I listened as they told me there was nothing stopping Hillary Clinton, right? And I had to go on my gut and my belief that this country has faced massive battles throughout history. And as a patriot myself, to give up and jump and dig a ditch and just jump in and say, forget it, is surrendering. Well, you can't surrender and we're in a battle. And part of this battle has been about getting people to really understand that I really believe that with, leading up to the Bushes, it really didn't matter if a Democrat or Republican were in office. They didn't really do a whole lot of damage, and none of them were really an actual destroyer. So you get somebody like Obama that was in office that was a true destroyer. And what kept me optimistic was when I talk to people and get them to understand and start paying attention, because that's what our goal is. When I say being part of the fight, is getting out there and getting people active, getting people motivated and listening. And when you start hearing and seeing that this reaction, just like when I went to the Trump rallies, and you would see, kids, elderly, Democrats talking to people that had never voted before. That means this movement has been working, all of us collectively, in the different avenues that we're approaching. Now you get into, we just left 4 years of the strongest economy we've ever had, America first, and what we talked about Tuesday night on the show, we had a leader that talked to the people. We had a leader that talked about real issues and then fought for them. He didn't talk down to us in a dismissive politician presidential speech. Well, now we have a leader that can't hardly even speak, with policies that are absolutely, within such a short period of time, he has literally destroyed us. He has destroyed us. We are now energy dependent on our enemies with high inflation. So these conversations are not as difficult. And like I said earlier, it's waking. So if Obama gave us Trump, what is Biden going to give us? Because he is at warp speed compared to what the Obama administration was doing to this country.
That's a very good point. And I like how you bring up that in 2016, it looked like it was a sure bet that Hillary was going to be the president. Well, that didn't happen. And we ended up with, one of the most nationalistic presidents in recent memory. So I like that. Definitely a message of optimism. Pivoting back to just straight Minnesota issues for a while. You guys mentioned earlier that you had Jensen on the show. What do you make of his run for governor?
What do you take this?
I'm a big fan of Scott Jensen. Obviously this early in the cycle, when we haven't seen many other credible contenders enter the race, it's really easy to get on board with the guy who jumped in the water first.
Yeah.
But I've known Scott Jensen for a long time. And what strikes me about him, and a quality that I found so rare in my interactions with candidates and elected officials, is he seems to have a sincere desire to understand problems and formulate public policy that, in his judgment, is the best policy, the best solution for the problem that as he perceives it. And, you would think that goes without saying, but it's not common. Most of these guys are driven by the political winds. They're driven by what's popular. They're not the type of person who would do what Scott Jensen has done over the course of the past 18 months and challenge the zeitgeist on something like COVID and the response that we've seen from Governor Tim Walz and the Anthony Fauci's of the world and the like. So that courage and that conviction, even though, you know, he's faltered, he's stumbled, his record on the Second Amendment is something that's going to be an issue in the campaign, and we've talked about that.
Yeah.
That too is a product of his willingness to have conversations that aren't popular, and I think that's a good thing.
Absolutely. You know, I like how you bring up that he's a pragmatic guy, because it makes so much sense that all politicians should be pragmatic. You know, they all claim to, you know, look for solutions that will work for you, but so few people do it, especially on issues like COVID, when there's sort of a prescribed narrative. You know, the powers that be basically handed down the narrative to the politicians, and they all fell right in line. Jensen did not. You mentioned he's got a bad Second Amendment record. That's something that's very concerning to me. Could you elaborate on that a little bit?
So he had an episode a while back, and I'm not deeply versed in the particulars, but he had signed a couple of pledges from a constituent group, Second Amendment rights organization, saying that he was never going to do anything to go against Second Amendment rights, gun rights. And then he turned around and signed his name onto legislation. I forget exactly what it would do, but it was not a good. What was it, Bella?
Red flag.
Yeah, red flag.
That's really
so it's
bad.
not good. Yeah, it was really, really bad. And so his explanation for it is that he wanted to have a conversation about the issue. And
well, you don't have a conversation by supporting a new law. You have right. He has a public platform. He could go on any radio show or any TV station and have that conversation.
That's right. And this is it's a very, very difficult hurdle for him to overcome, trying to back into the bushes on this signing on. Now, he did later take his name off of it, and he never voted for it.
Well, good.
And so that's good, but he still has to face the question of, well, why would you even contemplate doing this? And his answer, in essence, is that to his mind, having the conversation is not the same thing as actually supporting the bill, and that's going to be a tough sell. And we've let him know that that's going to be a tough sell. He claims to be 100% on board and gives all the right answers on Second Amendment issues. Now it's ultimately going to be up to those who make the decision on endorsement, the Republican activists, as to whether or not they believe him and whether or not they think he's.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm not anti-Jensen. I'm concerned by that issue, but not anti-Jensen. And he's not alone either. I mean, Dan Crenshaw on the national level also supported red flag laws. So this is a common sticking point for some of these Republicans. Have either of you looked into the two Mikes, Mike Marty and Mike Murphy? I think that they're also running for governor as Republicans, but honestly, I haven't looked into it very deeply.
I don't know of either one of them. Walter, you?
No, I don't. And I don't, not to toot my own horn, but I like to think that if their campaigns had much substance, I would know about it, right? Because I travel in these circles. I know who the people are, and I kind of put it on the candidate to be responsible for letting me know who they are and what they're about. And look, it's guaranteed there's a lot of people whose names are rumored who have not even started to dip their toes in these waters yet. And so maybe, even though the two Mikes have announced, maybe their strategy is to keep their powder dry until we get closer to caucus season, and we are going to learn more about them. Hopefully that's the case, because I'd like to make an informed decision.
But you also have to wonder how much powder they have if I haven't heard about them yet. I mean, that's a very good point. Awesome. So you had these guests on the show. Where are you broadcasting this show? Because it's difficult for a lot of different people to maintain a platform. I know that we've had people that are associated with Alpha News that help us with this live stream that are getting banned from Facebook. Facebook is putting various restrictions on our platform. I've been kicked off of YouTube a couple of times. It's really an uphill battle. How are you guys fighting that?
So we've been broadcasting on a platform called Blog Talk Radio. It's given us technical challenges. As a matter of fact, I just was talking to a PR person today on a strategy and a plan how to get the show out and promote to increase the listenership, right? Because yes, Facebook, that's where I primarily used to promote, and it's very limited in its reach. Walter and I, we actually can high five. We got kicked off. Our show got kicked off of YouTube.
Congrats.
Walter, what was it? Misinformation when we were talking about the consensus and the results of the election?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty remarkable. They said that we were spreading misinformation and engaged in fraudulent and deceitful practices because we quoted two mainstream sources. We quoted the United States Census number of voters who participated in the 2020 election. And then right next to it, we quoted the Pew Research Center number of ballots that were counted. And those two numbers don't match. In point of fact, there were close to 4 million more ballots than voters, according to those two statistics. That's all we said. And according to YouTube, that's misinformation. Well, I hope they're banning Pew Research Center and the US Census, because those are where we got our numbers from.
Well, if that's what it takes to downsize government is just banning the Census Bureau, maybe they're onto something. I would be open to that. But yeah, that's really ridiculous. What was that podcast platform? Sorry, I forgot that.
Blog Talk Radio.
Blog Talk Radio. All right. Is that sort of an up and coming social media thing? Or when you're looking out at the landscape, you've got Gab, you've got Parler, you've got Blog Talk, you've got all these alternate platforms. Which ones are you sort of putting stock in? Because eventually we will have to, transition away from platforms like this one.
We're actually in the process. We're in the process of shifting away from Blog Talk. Blog Talk's been around for a long time.
Okay.
And you haven't heard of it. There's a reason for that. It was a good idea when it first came out, but it has not kept up with the times. And so we're in the process of transitioning to streaming on YouTube, streaming on Facebook. And I'm looking for alternative platforms to stream on as well. But we want to be live streaming. We want to have a live show like you're doing here. And we want to be doing it on a regular basis so that listeners know what day, what time, and on as many channels as possible so that we can reach people where they're looking for.
Yeah. And, independent free speech live streaming is really the golden bullet. I mean, people that have developed their own independent live streaming platforms, I know it's incredibly expensive, it's incredibly difficult, but maybe that's where this is headed is, these digital pirates starting their own ships so that we can finally get off of the YouTubes and the Facebooks. That's what we can hope for.
Right.
Absolutely. So if people want to check out your show, do you have Twitter feeds, social media? Where can people find more of your content?
The best place to go is the BellaDangeloShow.com. So Bella is Bella and Dangelo is Dangelo. And so BellaDangeloShow.com, one word. And that's where you can get links to everywhere that it's at. And like I say, we're in the process of shifting over to this new live stream format. So we're going to be updating that page with the new places where people can find us.
Awesome. Looking forward a little bit, what emerging issues are you guys thinking that you're going to cover? What do you think is going to be sort of the next big media issue here in Minnesota?
Well, legislatively, we know there's going to be a special session. We know that the Republicans are going to suck at negotiating at it, and we're probably going to come out the other side with a really bad deal, just like we did leading up to the end of this session. So that'll probably be a big focus. We tend to throw tomatoes at our elected guys with ours next to their names, not because we don't like them, not because we don't want them to succeed, but because they just keep seeming to find ways to lose harder.
Yeah, I mean, they're not working very well for the people. You talked about pragmatism earlier. They're really not accomplishing that. And, sometimes they need some tomatoes thrown at them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I also appreciate, sorry to interrupt.
I was just going to say, aside from that, I feel like now that the mask mandate has ended, and there's this perception out there that the emergency is over, even though Walz retains his emergency powers. It's shifted the political landscape going into 2022 with both Jensen and whoever else gets into the ring to challenge Tim Walz. What does that campaign look like now? Because it's going to be a contest, it seems at this point, between a narrative which says We kept you safe. That's going to be the Walls narrative. We kept you safe through the worst pandemic in the history of mankind. And the counter narrative is going to be, you destroyed the economy and throttled the psychological development of our children and kept kids out of school and made them wear masks when they didn't need to, and followed this kook Anthony Fauci, who's been completely discredited by his own emails. So which of those two narratives is going to prevail? I think ultimately it's going to depend upon which side fights the hardest.
Yeah, yeah. And that's huge. People don't realize that Governor Walz is retaining his emergency powers, because you're right. People think the emergency's over because the most immediate manifestations of the tyranny, they've abated, they're gone, you don't see them anymore. So people assume that the political power that was reinforcing that tyranny is also gone, but it's not. It's still there. He retains the emergency powers. It could happen again. There's nothing from preventing a governor from seizing those powers again. And to speak to incompetence of Republicans, there hasn't been a lot done to prevent that tyranny from happening in the future.
No.
One of the messages that I keep bringing up routinely on the show is reminding people that they figured out how to lock us up, keep us from our jobs, mask up, glove up, and spray that disinfectant till we're, breathing it through our whatever. But they figured it out, right? They've done it, and trying to get people to understand that now they've done it once. And this is what, when last March, when this whole thing broke out, I immediately started trying to educate about our constitutional rights and the unconstitutionality of the orders and what happened, and the fact that we have to fight next time. And we've talked about this, how, when is the government going to try it again? And what will our response be? Because we don't ever want to be forever begging to, get in, which door is it? Is it the front, or is it the in or the exit door? When did they get to the point where they were telling you that at Cub Foods you can only go in the indoor and out the outdoor with your mask, your gloves, your disinfectant? Stop. I hope and try to remind people they've done it once, and we've got to fight, baby, fight, because they're going to do it again. And I hope we learned our lesson.
Well, and the important takeaway is that they absolutely learned their lesson. They know exactly what to do. They know what steps work. They know how compliant we're going to be. But it doesn't seem like people have really learned how to fight it. It seems like we were immediately broken, and we learned how to comply, and our leaders didn't really learn how to resist politically. So, I hope that there's more lessons that have been learned, but it really seems like the general populace hasn't learned a bunch, which is why it's so important to have voices like both of yours out there, spreading the counter narrative.
Well, here's a bit of optimism, okay? If the Fauci fraud hadn't been exposed nationally, if people like me, you, Walter, we were still considered conspiracy theorists, right? As we're trying to educate people, which I tore this thing apart way from the beginning. I never put a mask on, I never did the glove, I never did any of it. But with this fraud coming out and talking about it and exposing it, and educating people, because this really was one of the biggest hoaxes ever perpetrated on us, on a level that if we would have just done what the science, protect the elderly and those that were compromised, use the therapeutics, and not become political, we wouldn't have lost the loss of life. We wouldn't have permanently damaged our children and our elderly. So by this coming out, this is a good thing that it's come out, because this is one of the biggest things that also steered the election of 2020.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I love the Fauci emails. I spent half a day reading those Fauci emails when they came out. It was so funny. So many little good bits in there. But before we get too far off into COVID territory and Facebook terminates our live stream halfway through, I think we should wrap it up. Remind people again where they can access your content, where the show is, and what social media feeds they should be following.
Absolutely. It's the Bella, Bella, Dangelo, D as in David, Angelo show.com. And on the website, all of the Twitter and Facebook social media links will be there. We are on some other social media links, which we will be adding them and updating them, but that's the quickest and easiest way to source is thebelladangelo show.com.
Absolutely. I love the story of the show, founded in the back of a pickup truck in an oil field in the Dakotas. I mean, that's about as middle America conservative as it possibly can get. So I really encourage our viewers to go check out that show because it's an important perspective. And, a lot of those people out there in those oil fields in the Dakotas are really the core of what it means to be an American conservative. So we really appreciate you coming on, and we really appreciate the work you guys are doing over on the show.
Thank you very much.
Awesome.
Glad to
Thanks
be
so
here.
much. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on. And to our viewers, thank you guys for tuning in once again. Have a good night. And